I'm Janine Malone.
And I'm Kristen Ciccolini.
And you're listening to It's Just a Phase. Each week, we'll bring you inspiring and informative conversations about honoring the different cycles of life, covering topics of health and wellness, moon phases, astrology, witchcraft, feminism, and more. So you can superpower your well-being to live your best life. Hey, Kristen.
Hey, Janine. Are you feeling it?
Feeling what?
Retrograde.
Oh, God, am I ever.
There are about to be 5 planets in retrograde. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. I know that sounds a little bit scary, as you can tell by Janine's reaction, but it definitely doesn't have to be. So we'll be focusing mostly on Mercury retrograde today, since that's the one you always hear about. Yeah, Janine, tell us a little bit more about retrogrades and what it means, what we can expect from it.
Totally. So retrogrades are something that if you are on the internet in 2020, you probably hear quite a bit about. But it, for me and in my practice, I've come across a lot of people who don't actually really know what that even means. So what when a planet is retrograde, what's happening is that the planet is passing by Earth in its orbit. So it appears to be moving backwards from the Earth's perspective. It's obviously not actually moving backwards. That would be very bad. But it's similar to like when you pass a car on the highway and from your perspective, it can look like that car is moving in reverse rather than you are going forward. So what I think of when I think of that is thinking about retrogrades as this time to challenge our perceptions. So something can be, it's giving us like a different angle to look at things. And while that can feel really frustrating, and we'll get into all the reasons that retrogrades have kind of a bad reputation, it actually is, from a cyclical perspective, this opportunity to challenge our normal pace, be confident taking time and reviewing things, handling things that maybe we push to the side for lack of time or just like not wanting to deal with something. We kind of are, when a planet goes retrograde, we have the opportunity to sort of revisit those things. Right now, like Kristen was saying, we are about to have 5 planets retrograde. We're going to focus primarily on Mercury today because that is, like we said, the scapegoat of the internet. But really, I want to just state from the top that when you hear about retrogrades, nothing bad happens. It requires us to shift our understanding and maybe shift our approach in order to stay grounded. But you can make retrogrades work for you, and they actually allow a lot of room for transformation. Do you agree with that, Kristen?
Yes, and actually, I just wanted to interject and say something. So when I think of retrograde, or like
Yeah.
how to explain the physical actual retrograde, what that means, I always think of the when you're on a train, and then you're stationary, but the train next to you is moving, and for a second it gives you that like
Oh.
woozy, awful feeling. But the way you described it was just passing a car on the highway, which feels a lot less awful. So it's just
Yeah.
funny that you say the perception, like perception is key, and like the way that I was thinking of it versus the way you were thinking of it, it it just feels so much different. So yeah, I
Yeah.
totally agree that just the way that you look at it or how you approach it can be really important.
Totally. I think that, like, what's that saying? Like, what you focus on is like, whatever, focusing on something is how it grows. And so if you're kind of convincing yourself, and I've done this many times too, like, oh my God, it's going to be bad. Like, Mercury's going retrograde, and I have this like project I want to do, and it's going to happen in between. It's like you're just kind of building up the anticipation of something going awry. That's not to say that you shouldn't take precaution and like use this energy actually to an advantage, which I think can be done. But yeah, it's nothing to fear. I do think that it's important because, again, retrograde is something we really associate. A lot of people just associate with Mercury, but there are 5 planets retrograde at this time. There's Venus, which is the planet of love and money, which stations direct on June 25th. Mercury, which we'll be focusing on today, goes retrograde on Wednesday, June 17th, and stations direct on July 12th. Saturn, the planet of structure, is currently retrograde and stations direct in September, September 29th. Jupiter, the planet of growth and expansion, will be retrograde until September. And Pluto, the planet of transformation, stations direct on October 4th. So,
It's a
ah.
long time. And what does stations direct mean?
So that's when the planet and Earth's the perception of the planet's orbits, it has gotten to the place where now you can see very clearly that we are actually moving in the same direction. That shift in how we're perceiving the planet's orbit is back to quote unquote normal. So that's when like the effects of retrograde start to dissipate.
Can I just
Basic,
share
yeah,
another perspective that just popped into my head? Maybe it might
please.
be easier to think about. Think of like a track race where you have everyone, there's like all the, when you're going around the loop, there's like the inner loop and it just goes outer and outer. So when you're rounding that bend, and it seems like, I mean, everyone seems to be running at the same pace, but it
Hmm.
seems like some people are behind. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's kind of when it happens, is when it's rounding a certain bend. Like, that's why it looks
Right,
that way.
totally. So basically, all of this preamble is to say that this summer is really a time to be super conscientious about how we are spending our time and our energy. So, with all those planets retrograde, we're really, really being invited to slow down and think about where we can get back to basics, where we can kind of review and reconnect and um, reclaim certain aspects of ourselves, basically get back to a pace that allows us to have a shift in perspective instead of like being in a blind panic. Understanding a shift in perspective and learning more to change your point of view is hard work. Not hard work necessarily, but it does require a little bit of space and self-awareness and some time to just be like, okay, and think critically, I guess. Allow yourself to think critically this summer.
About a lot of
That's my
things.
thought. Yeah, exactly. There is a lot to do.
Yeah, so we're focused on Mercury right now because it starts on the 17th and this
Mhm.
is publishing on the 15th. So, Mercury, the internet's favorite scapegoat, everyone is afraid of it. They don't know why. It's just like, oh, Mercury's in retrograde. That means all these awful things are happening. But real talk, it's not that bad. And as you
Oh,
might have guessed from all of the planets that we just listed that are or going into retrograde, every planet goes into retrograde and you'd never think about it. So, it doesn't have to affect you. It may, and we'll talk about different ways to approach it. But planning and intention goes a really long way in approaching
mm.
this. And it's a really great example of why working with cycles is so awesome. That's why we created a whole podcast about it. So, yeah, so something that in our normal linear time seems scary, but it becomes purposeful and important. So, just a way to connect with a different pace, align our priorities, and ensure that we're just tuned in and tuned up. So,
Right.
yeah. So, what is Mercury, Janine?
Great question. Going back to your, I don't know, when do you learn about planets? Third grade science.
Yeah, when you make
Um,
that like diorama with all the
yeah,
foam balls.
totally. So Mercury, as some of you may remember from that beautiful diorama you made, is literally the smallest and innermost planet in our solar system. So Mercury retrograde actually happens about 3 or 4 times a year, given that Mercury's orbit around the sun is so much smaller than Earth's. So we pass each other all the time, right? So this is as much as we're kind of constantly, I know there's like literally a website called Is Mercury Retrograde, and it just is like, yes it is, or no, it must be some other problem you have. It does happen pretty often, and we all make it through. And every time Mercury goes retrograde, it lasts about a month. So like we said at the top, this current retrograde is starting on Wednesday, the 17th of June, and Mercury will station direct on July 12th. Intellectually speaking, if we want to get into a little Roman god conversation, Mercury is named for a Roman deity who is the messenger of the gods. So when you think about that again and you think about Mercury, think about how we are translating information from like inside of us to outside of us. So, how we think about things, how we reason, how we make things, the tools we use to get from one place to the other really come up. And, I think there's a lot to be said about, in mythology with um, both Mercury in Roman mythology and Hermes in Greek mythology. They're like kind of have the ability to be troublemakers. So sometimes it's like, I don't know, it helps me to think about that when I'm having some little tech snafus during Mercury retrograde. Like I'm just like, oh, you sneaky little troublemaker. There's just it can be helpful for me to personify it to something that feels like, okay, there's just like trickery happening. It's not happening to me and it's not the end of the world. It's just like a time to be more aware.
I like that perspective, just having like this little trickster around fucking
Yeah.
around with you.
Yeah, exactly. Just someone being like, "Oops, I dropped your mail." Like you're like, "Okay, it was funny the first time. Now it's not funny anymore."
Well, magically or on an energetic level, Mercury rules technology, communication, contracts, travel, and commerce. So there's a lot of implications around that. So this is where all of the
Mm.
negativity comes in. So I'm going to be the negative one. Janine's going to be the positive one and tell you all the
Oh,
good things about it.
I
So
never get to be good cop. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
anytime. So I think the main thing that we all know about is that, the technology and communication aspect go haywire during Mercury retrograde. So
Mm.
there can be some misunderstandings, because not everything translates well over text or through email. So it's good to have in person conversations instead.
Totally.
Some people might leave you on red, or do you say read or read?
Red.
Okay, I say red too, but I know some people say it the other way. We're right.
Oh.
um, yeah, so and that could lead you to like an anxiety spiral, like why didn't they answer me?
Oh my
When it
god.
could be that
Yes.
something I do often accidentally is like read something while I'm in the middle of something and then forget to respond. So
Totally.
that can lead to a whole thing.
I
Also,
think
oh,
I
go
think
ahead.
about like, oh sorry, I just think about like when someone will sends a text that's like okay, period, and you're just like,
Uh, No, like
do they hate me?
all of the time, that is not okay. Unless you're like legitimately angry, that's not okay. My mom started doing that out of the blue. I don't know why, but I'm always just like, why are you so mad all the time?
Right. It's just so funny. And I feel like that's like something I also notice coming up is like not only being misunderstood, but also like it's I think sometimes it's best, or what I find to be helpful in that particular instance is like trying to lead with making a generous assumption that this
Mm,
person doesn't actually hate you and is just like in the middle of something. Granted, during Mercury retrograde that can be hard work.
yes, exactly. And also, once you do end up communicating with this person, or whoever, whether you're like writing a blog or whatever it is, you may
Yeah.
not be able to either find the right words or something might come out the way you didn't mean it to. Um, and it's just a general time where you just may not be on the same page with people in your communication. So that's
Mm.
something to be aware of, and that's something you can prepare for. And we'll talk a little bit how to prepare for that later, but that's just something to be aware of. Another
Mhm.
thing, Mercury retrograde, going backwards, it brings things up from the past, especially people from the past, especially exes.
Don't do
So
it.
a major thing that everyone says not to do during Mercury retrograde is to text your ex. Do not do that. You will
Don't do
want
it.
to, but you must resist it. Also, like even friends from the past, like ex friends, people that you have dumped for one reason or another. And my like sometimes I think about people who I've just, had to cut off. And
Mm,
sometimes I'm like, oh, sometimes they were really fun. And like, maybe I'm missing out now. Maybe they've changed. And then, but then you got to resist it and you got to think about, no, these are all the reasons they were a bad friend. These are all the reasons they were a bad partner. So don't do
right.
that. Or
Yeah.
if you want to, just wait until this is over.
Right.
Um,
Sleep on it.
yeah.
You
And
will
then
you won't feel the same way in the morning.
yeah, and if you have the urge to do that, just like text a friend and let
Email
them
us.
know.
Just
Yes.
email us at itsjustaphasepod@gmail.com. This is what I want to say to my ex, and I'm not going to.
We'll be
I
there
will
for
field
you.
all of those responses.
Can be kind of juicy too, so I'll listen in. Um, another thing to be really just think about this is to double check all of your communication. So
Mm.
reread for typos, make sure you're calling people the right names when you're emailing them, or not having some embarrassing typo, and also make sure you're sending things to the right person, especially if you're
Ugh.
talking shit.
Who among us hasn't made this misstep?
I think back to my first job out of college, which I absolutely hated, but we all like no one ever talked to each other in person. We all just like talked on GChat.
Mm.
And I remember I made fun of my boss
Oh
or
no.
or my like immediate manager, and he sat directly across from me, and I sent it to him. It was
No.
something like, I bet Jason sleeps in Batman sheets or something like.
Oh my
And he just
God.
looked up at me and I was like, I meant to send that to you.
Yeah, like JK, haha.
It was probably retrograde.
Oh my God, totally.
Yeah, but do you have a story like that?
Um,
Make me feel
yeah.
better.
Oh, I definitely do. I mean more than I can even count, but this
Yeah.
is the one for whatever reason that's coming up to mind. It obviously was so traumatic to my little 6th grade self, but I'm sure it was during Mercury retrograde where I left a notebook behind in a teacher's class who I hated, and I had written how much I hated her and how ugly she was on the inside.
Jane, I did the
and she
same thing and I got
and she found
suspended.
it. Oh my God, you got suspended.
I did. I got suspended
I
for a day.
I actually just have like this very vivid memory of like for whatever reason, the notebook thing happened. She gave me back my notebook and she wrote in it like next to the stuff
Oh my God.
like that she wanted to talk to me the next day, and for some reason my parents and me were going to literally, this is hilarious, the circus that night, and I actually threw up there because I was so nervous.
Oh my God.
So I can't go back in time and prove that that was Mercury retrograde, but
I can't
just for
believe we have the
anyone.
same experience. That's so funny. And the only reason I did it was because I was trying to impress this other mean girl because I was like not a cool kid. And she wrote down mean stuff too, but she told them it was my agenda that that we wrote stuff in. And I got in
Oh,
trouble and she didn't. And I just
hate it.
remember crying so much in the principal's office. My blue mascara because it was 7th grade.
Oh, babe. Oh, sweetie.
Just don't be mean. That's
Just don't be mean in general, but like especially don't be mean during Mercury retrograde.
oh
I
man.
also keep thinking of, and this has happened to me a few times now that but as of the time of recording, we are still under a stay-at-home order, and so a lot of business is happening over Zoom, and I just think that it's been really interesting to watch like people forget that they're still sharing their screen and like
Yes.
going up and like it's just save yourself the embarrassment.
Save yourself the embarrassment and think a little harder about what you're doing.
Right, relive the embarrassment of those times that it
Mhm.
has happened, Mercury retrograde or not, and just be like, "You know what? I'm going to opt out. I'm going to not do that today. I'm
Yeah.
going to be nicer."
Yeah. I'm glad I learned from that experience, even
Yeah,
though I also
exactly.
learned again in that job too. So
Right. I mean,
sometimes we need to be
some
taught a
lessons
few
you have to
times.
learn twice.
Oh boy. And definitely if you guys want to email us and let us know your
Oh my
experience
god,
so we
yeah,
don't feel as
please
bad.
tell us your embarrassing stories of sending people the wrong thing. I actually live for that.
Me too. Anyway, um, Yeah, so this next one is a little superstitious, but I mean everything, all of this is. But no tech purchases or contract signing, since Mercury rules technology and contracts. It's best not to start anything new at this time, especially those kinds of things. You also want to save your documents, back up your data. If you're traveling, like leave early.
Mm-hmm.
um, Also, keep beverages away from your computer.
That sounds personal.
Ask me how I know. Have you ever had to put your entire laptop in a sheet pan of rice?
I have not.
It's well, if you spill anything on your laptop, that's something to do. It works.
Oh,
It's just very frustrating when you do it.
yes. There you go.
um, yeah, get your oil changed, get your tire fixed, check your engine light, all that good stuff.
Right.
So really, this is all about just being cautious and a little superstitious, but some superstition isn't so bad if you're just getting your shit together.
Right, right. I mean, any superstition that's asking us to slow down and be more conscientious, I'm like all here for. Like, I think we should just do that as a rule.
Mm,
Luckily, I think that Mercury does have some opportunities for us when it is retrograde. It helps us be more thoughtful in our communications and our actions and be more discerning of like what's being communicated to us. Sometimes I like to think about, in a certain period of time when Mercury is retrograde, um, like if there's certain areas of my life that I feel like I'm feeling the effects of Mercury like much more heavily, it's sort of an invitation to be like, okay, like where do I need to recalibrate here? Because I mean, I know a lot of people who are like, "Oh, I don't, you know, Mercury doesn't fuck with me in retrograde. Like I feel totally fine." And I always take that as like, "Okay, well you're like super tuned in. Like you're just doing what you need to do. You're being conscientious." Like I don't think that it's tricky just to be tricky, but sometimes you have to learn the hard way, I guess.
yeah. I mean, Mercury, I feel like when it's in retrograde doesn't affect me a lot. I have
Yeah.
noticed certain ones like just
Yeah.
fuck with me, but most of the time I'm just like I mean, we've talked about this how much Virgo there is in my chart. So like I'm very organized anyway.
True.
So I just remember at this time to like try to be more careful in my
Right.
communication. But usually
Totally.
like if you've got things together, it may not affect you as badly.
Yeah, it's actually like I kind of think about it in the way of like it's like I don't know why I just keep going back to like car analogies, but it's like when you are going really fast and you're not really paying attention how fast you're going and then you have to slow down and you have to hit your brakes so much harder than you thought and you're like,
Mm,
"Oh, wow, I wasn't even aware that I was like really speeding there." Like that to me is what snafus under Mercury retrograde kind of bring up for me, like when I'm just lacking a little bit of awareness, which
mm.
can happen from time to time.
Just like forces you to slow
Yeah,
down.
exactly. You're like, whoa, like when you slam the brakes and your bag falls off the chair and there's stuff everywhere. Not fun. But opportunity. It's also a great time for evaluating the connections that we want to make in terms of contract signing. So you can kind of think about collaborations at this point, like start conversations, things like that. It's because if we're taking the precautions of Mercury retrograde, we actually have the ability to be relatively discerning. So that doesn't mean you have to you know, halt life as you know it, but it's actually an interesting time to reevaluate. It also, of course, helps us slow down. It can occasionally make our energy kind of low. So it's really important for us to practice self-care during Mercury retrograde. It can affect our sleep and things like that. So, and honestly, I actually find that I have pretty intense dreams during Mercury retrograde. Like my brain is processing a lot of communication and relationships and things like that, which is not very restful for me. So I definitely relate to this.
Maybe you're talking to people in your dreams.
Oh, maybe I am. Oh my god. Yeah, Kristen was just told that she
Yeah, I had an Akashic Records reading with Michelle from Holisticism, and she told me that my partner Dan and I talk in our dreams to each other, which I thought was so cool. But maybe you're having other conversations that are just really tiring.
Maybe you're just like in back-to-back meetings in your dreams.
Yeah. One Zoom meeting after another. It sounds more like a nightmare, but
Oh my God. No, but truly. And so, I mean, what are like one of the ways that you practice self-care during Mercury retrograde, Kristen?
I think it's more just, just being more thoughtful about that communication because
Yeah,
I mean, I consider that a version of self-care because it saves me a lot of stress.
totally.
If I just like screw up an email, send it to the wrong person, or, especially if you're doing business communication, if you're like launching a product. I mean, probably not the best time to launch your product, but
Yeah.
if you accidentally send it to the wrong segment of your email list and like all of these people buy something that you didn't want sent to them.
Yeah,
So
totally.
yeah, just like I mean, like I've said, um, being organized is part of self-care just because it saves you so much stress and it saves you so much worry about things going awry because you know that you've double checked it a million times. And I mean, that's self-care looks different for everyone.
No,
But in
totally.
terms of Mercury and like the technology and communication and all that, I think that's a really important part.
Yeah, definitely. I like set up sort of like boundaries for myself around like when I usually have like a strict like tech shutdown time during Mercury retrograde, so that I can get better sleep. And same thing, I actually, if I have emails that I need to write to people or like a newsletter to send, I really do the work of trying to like write what I think is a good draft and then sleep on it and then come back to it the next
Mm.
day because I just find I just find that like the miscommunications happen in like being a little too like laser focused, like it's hard to see the other people's perspectives during this time. You're just like so caught up in your own brain.
That's a really
So
good point.
yeah, I really like to do that. And honestly, sometimes it's like, oh, like I'll like have an idea to like write to someone about something or want to like have even a tough conversation, and it's like I'll write the draft and leave it in my draft box, and then like the next day I don't even remember that I had it. And like
Mhm.
2 months later I'll be cleaning out my inbox and I'm like, "Oh yeah, I was so pissed about that." And like it actually was nothing.
Yeah, I do find, especially if there's a lot of emotion behind what you're writing, just
Mm,
to sleep on it like that. Like get
yeah.
everything out and make sure that if you are drafting an email, do not put anyone in the recipient box until you're ready to send because you do not want to send a first draft angry email
No, you do
accidentally.
not. You don't, you won't.
Don't put anyone in there. Just, you know what? Open a Google document.
Right. That's all. That's all you got to do. So yeah, I mean, generally, I think there's an opportunity for us to kind of like get our shit together here, to clean up clutter, to focus on things that are a little bit more like on our internal life, that have a little bit less to do with communication, being really clear about being in alignment for ourselves and in the projects that we're taking on and the relationships that we're part of. I think it's just a good time to kind of clear clutter in some ways, but also just like put the focus a little bit less on the external and the moving super fast, super far forward. It's like it can be a restful period if you allow it to be. Um, and then we really love this from the Astro Twins, who suggest just focusing on activities that start with the prefix re, so which means to go back, right? So review all your contracts, renew your commitments rather than making new ones, prepare to repeat yourself often, reuniting with old friends. I just think that that's an awesome way to look at it.
Yeah, I love the Astro Twins.
Yeah.
I when I first found them, like I'm definitely not an astrology expert. Like I know about the basics, like this stuff, but I find their horoscopes so weirdly accurate. Like me, not the daily stuff because they do talk a lot about like work and coworkers, and like I work for myself, so like you're my coworker,
Right.
or I'm my coworker, or now you're my coworker. But anyway, so the monthly horoscopes that they have, are
Mm.
so accurate, like down to the day sometimes. It's really weird. So,
Ooh.
yeah, if you're looking for a good astrology resource, they're at astrostyle.com. I also love Emily Price. She's the voluptuous witch, although I think she changed her website to emilyheatherprice.com now.
Oh,
So, yeah, those are just some two resources to go if you want to know more about any of the retrogrades, because they're talking about all of them.
yes. Yes, yes, yes.
So there's a shadow period that they talk about a lot, which is the 2 weeks before and after retrograde. These can be positive. So it's just an opportunity to prepare and reflect. The first part, the 2 weeks before, is really getting prepped for the retrograde. So we talked about how Mercury rules tech, communication, contracts, travel, and commerce. In all of those areas, when you start preparing for this retrograde, think about in those categories, where are there loose ends that need to be tied up? Like, do you need to respond to an email? Do you need to sign a contract before this all happens? Do you need to make travel plans? Um, what can you do to make sure that everything is solid, everything's been double checked? You know, make sure that you're saving all your documents, double check the numbers you're texting, like we said, the
Yes.
people you're emailing, any travel plans, just double check that you've booked for the correct dates. Because I guess you can feel some of the effects a little bit before and after it happens. So I know with that happening 3 or 4 times a year, it's like a lot of time to be thinking about these things, but also we should always be a little bit more
Yeah, like
thoughtful.
maybe we should just be more conscientious of our communication.
Yeah.
Period.
What a thought.
I know. Maybe it's a good rule.
Yeah. And then there's the 2 weeks afterwards. So it's basically like, okay, things just got fucked up. What did you learn? Like you just want to reflect, and it's all about integration and processing, like what just happened. So, what
Mm.
came up over the last few weeks? Or, where did you feel misunderstood? Where did you keep being reminded to slow down? It's all about just processing what went on. And it's 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks, and think where you found some challenges, and think where things may have gotten a little bit difficult, and how you can either prepare for the next time, or just try to avoid that from happening in the future.
Yeah, totally. I just had like a vision of like someone coming in like I was a coach or something and like printing out my emails and like circling things in red,
Oh
being like, see
no.
here where you did that. That was not great. Like game tape or whatever.
I don't know if I would love or hate that.
Yeah. I mean, it's so true though. It's just like interesting. I mean, I think for me, it's always really interesting to like, I think our hindsight is obviously very much aligned with our perception of things. So it's interesting to just go back to the sources sometimes and be like, hmm, could I have done that like a little differently? Or where did things, can I actually pinpoint where things unraveled a little bit now that I'm out of like the emotion of the situation?
Yeah.
I think that's a nice practice again for Mercury retrograde times and just for all times.
Yeah, so I mean, we kind of shared some things to do, but
Yeah,
just to recap and add a little bit more. So, some tips for surviving Mercury retrograde unscathed. um,
got to do it.
Obviously, first thing is to plan ahead. Like we said, tie up the loose ends, get your contracts in order, handle any tech woes. So if there's, something going on in your computer, go to the Genius Bar, get it figured out,
Yep.
and just get organized. Um, you'll also want to get some offline interaction. So I know, like Janine said, we have the stay-at-home order right now, but even just like a Zoom call can be really helpful, since Mercury rules tech and communication. Even with our best intentions, messages sent through text or email can get misconstrued without those nonverbal cues. You can pick up the phone, have an
Mhm.
in-person meeting, or just get on Zoom. Sometimes it's just easier to understand each other when you can see facial expressions, body language. And also hearing your tone of voice is really important too. So,
Totally.
yeah. And then if you want to get witchy with it, you can create an altar for Mercury. It's kind of like please help me out here. I made this altar for you.
Yeah, like, look.
Here's my offering. Please don't mess with
Totally.
me. But some things you can do, some correspondences with the planet Mercury: almond, anise, lavender, mullein, parsley. Like you can even use some things that you can find at the grocery store.
Yeah.
You can put some crystals. Aventurine and citrine are correspondences of Mercury. Also, the colors yellow, violet, and orange,
Mm.
and things like wings, feathers, and reflective surfaces as well. So any types of things, anything that you might have thought of that while I was going through that you can put on your altar can be an offering to Mercury.
Oh, I'm gonna try that. I've never done an altar to Mercury, but I love altar making.
You do, and we'll do an episode about that at some point, I'm sure.
Yes, oh, that would be fun. Yeah, and so I mean, a couple other things. Just again, waiting to respond. It's great advice in general, but just take a breath, take a walk, sleep on it before responding to any feedback, opinions, or invitations. Just compose yourself to ensure that your message is received as clearly as possible. You will never regret taking a beat before, giving an answer. I think that again, good practice. Maybe if we're doing this for the whole month, it becomes just a habit that we have that is really enviable by other people.
Mm.
I envy people who do this, who practice this more regularly. And one other thing I really like to do is consume less content. So I think there's a lot of extra work that we have to put in to slow down, to say what we mean, to read for subtext. And it's just a nice time if you want to take a social media break. It doesn't mean you have to go off it entirely, but anything that you find that you're consuming and that it can be hard to differentiate between what you truly think and how you truly want to say something versus how it's being said to you, can be really important. So, clearing your mind as much as possible, it's really important to reconnect with your true wants, needs, desires without all the noise. Again, great advice in general. Having good psychic hygiene is really important. I like to just kind of tune out at the end of the day, like whether that's a little bit of a meditation or using salt in the shower to just kind of clear the clutter. I think that can get wrapped up in a Mercury retrograde as well, as we just kind of feel there's like this ball of tangled intention that we're not always sure how to get through. And I think that's can be a really helpful practice.
You know what I like to do for clarity?
What?
I like to use your soap that you made with wild lather.
Oh, that's so
Or I
nice.
haven't actually used it yet. I just sniff it because I really like the smell of
Oh my God,
it.
literally, you are not the first, second, or third person to tell me that. I'm like, oh, I guess I have to make another or order another batch so that people can actually use them.
It is such a strong, clear, clean smell. I love it so much. Yeah.
Oh,
When I first took
me
it
too.
out of the package, it like punched me in the face with the scent, and I was like, "This is amazing."
Oh my God, I love to hear it. Yeah, exactly. So like whatever is clearing to you, I think there's a lot of ways that we can think about that. But yeah, Mercury, it's extra tricky to like, I don't know, to try and get to the bottom of a misunderstanding when there's like all these layers of energies and opinions and thoughts like buried on top of it. So just try to, like I said, if you've been considering a social media break, might not be a bad time. Um yeah, I mean, that's kind of I think all we have today. This is a lot. I
Yeah,
hope.
but we somehow kept it tight for once.
Oh yeah, we're getting so good. Episode 4. But yeah, I mean, I think that like hopefully my hope, my intention is really to make Mercury retrograde not feel scary because I hate when people feel intimidated by, again, 3 or 4 months out of the year
Yeah.
we're working with this guy. So um I just really hope that this feels helpful,
I think that that's like our
actionable.
main goal with this whole podcast is to make
Yeah.
things a little less scary. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, because I people come into witchcraft, they come into their health, they come into all these kinds of things with all of these, preconceived ideas about how scary things might be, and how stressful things are, or especially with health, it's like, oh, I just have to feel this way, that's just how it
Yeah.
is. Or
Yeah.
Mercury retrograde, it just has to be awful, that's just how it is. So
Right.
yeah, we want to make everything feel positive. We're definitely not a like positive vibes only space, because
No.
I think we both of us, under, not to speak for you, but I think both of us operate under the idea that you have to sort of face the darkness to see the light. So
Hmm.
we don't want you to be afraid of things you don't need to be afraid of.
Right. Like put it to use. Like we're getting through it either way. So you can kick and scream, or you can just like surrender to changing your behavior slightly and seeing what you learn. I think it's pretty obvious which of those sounds more appealing. Well, next week we have a banger of an episode because there's so much going on. We're gonna be talking about summer solstice, Cancer season, the new moon in Cancer. There's like a lot of transits that kind of are happening, and we'll have a lot to say. But I think I speak for both of us in just saying, like, best of luck out there. We're all together in this blessed Mercury retrograde. Sometimes it is nice to have a scapegoat, but I think you guys can handle this. I think we can handle it. And just don't say anything mean about your sixth grade teacher, I think is what we learned today.
Oh man. Yeah, let us know how it goes, and if any of these tips helped you out. And if you have any other tips, we'd love to hear them too. So you can share those with us on Instagram, or at It's Just a Phase Pod. If you have any other comments, questions, suggestions for future episodes, you can email us at itsjustaphasepod@gmail.com. And if you liked what you heard today, feel free to review us in iTunes. It helps other people find our show, and it also makes us feel really warm and fuzzy inside. We hope you have a protected Mercury retrograde, and we'll be there for you if not. So, yeah, thanks for being here with me, Janine.
Oh, thanks for having me.
I'll have you next week too.
Bye, guys.
Bye.